This episode of Product for Product is brought to you by The Resurrector, a book by Moshe now pre-selling at igg.me/at/the-resurrector.
Hello, everyone. It's Matt and Moshe. Welcome back to Product for Product. Thanks for tuning in this week. User experience is very important to a product success. So we're excited to have Troy Winfrey on the show to discuss his work as a UX researcher. We'll also be discussing tools he's using to conduct and manage that research. So welcome to the show, Troy. Thanks for joining us. Let's take a sec to introduce yourself before we hop in.
Thank you very much, Matt and Moshe. It's my pleasure to be here. My name's Troy Winfrey. I'm currently based in Atlanta, Georgia, although nearly all of my work is remote these days and likely to be so in the future. And I have been a user experience researcher for about 15 years. And the short answer for that is I help people design products that are more what their users really want. You know, what should we be building is a frequent product manager question. I help answer that question. So I've done a lot of things. I work with a lot of big clients, Social Security, the World Bank, various pharma companies. And for the past 4 or 5 years, I've been helping Atlanta startups and the startup scene with strategy and focusing their offering to find that mythical lead customer that they need to get traction.
Very exciting.
Yeah. And hi, everyone. Thank you, Troy, for joining us on the podcast. We thought it would be extremely useful for product managers to have someone like you on the show because many product managers actually don't have someone in their company that can do what you're doing. And a lot of us actually have to do it on our own. I've done my own UX research just because I didn't have anyone to help me with that. So it's really interesting for us to learn about this and also to learn about the tools. So maybe we would start a bit with the process. What does it all mean to you? And what will be the process that you usually take when you start a project like that?
Well, there are a number of methodologies you could use for user research. I have used a lot of the basic ones like card sorting. I've used some really exotic ones like metaphor elicitation technique, which is highly specialized. I've done eye tracking. Nowadays, what I normally do is what I call qualitative behavioral modeling. And that is simply finding out more about the mental models or how people think about a task by interviewing them, analyzing that, and then drawing up a roadmap that the product manager can use to make product decisions.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So I'm trying to apply this to some experience that I had in the past. There was, I'm not sure who created this example of mapping user experiences, but are you familiar with the toast example?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So just for our audiences, this is where you take different people and you ask them, just draw on sticky notes, the process of making a toast. And then you see how every person approaches it differently. And then because one person will start with, buying the bread in the store. One person will start with just taking the bread out of the cabinet and cutting it. Another person I've seen started it from growing some wheat and cutting the wheat and making the flour. And then also a lot of people that I've seen, some of them are using a toaster, some of them are using a pan. So there are really different ways that people are doing the same tasks that for all of us, it's quite obvious. And then once you do it with multiple people, you put it all on one board and you align each one of them together because there are a lot of things that are quite similar between them. And then you create almost a generic one that kind of includes all of them together. Did I describe that right?
You certainly did. That's great. Mm-hmm. And one thing I love about Toast is it really packs a lot into a very short, simple explanation. Because when you think about it, it gets really interesting. If you've ever done this exercise, the interesting part is how many steps people leave out. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily just the guy who starts with the wheat, right? But I mean, even the guy who's just I get the bread. This is a very simple process, and they still leave out steps. When you look at this too, you will find, as Moshe says, that people care about different aspects.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
you need to think about that, but not all of them might be worth supporting. So the guy who's like, buying the seed to sow the wheat, he might not be as important unless everyone starts saying that. And that's the advantage of qualitative research, because you can come up with these really game-changing sorts of insights that don't come up normally. And of course, if they're millennials, they're just going to go get their avocado toast.
That's right.
But
That's absolutely right. Some of them will
so
just,
that might be something else,
will just
Might
say,
be-
I'm going to Starbucks or wherever they are and get it. So tell us a bit about the tools that you're using to do something like that. Because like I mentioned, I've seen it done on a whiteboard with sticky notes. So that's a very, actually, I think it's the best way to do it, because everyone is in the same room and you really have this dynamic of the group. But these days, it's a much harder way to do it because of COVID, working from home or working remotely. And I don't think we will go away from that. I think we will still want to be able to work remotely in the future. So tell us, which tools are you using for something like that?
So the toast method is really a variant of design thinking, or what we might call participant design would be the formal term for it. So there are tools such as Mural and Miro that support this behavior. Now, the interesting thing is, when I was in grad school for this and studying all these old HCI papers, people have been trying to foster this remote collaboration for decades, ever since the 70s. And the US government actually spent a fortune through one of their military DARPA programs to investigate collaborative design work. They were using overhead lamps and like this marker system, and it was crazy, right? But that's how important this was to them. So nowadays, I haven't done that much with Miro and Mural, because that's a different sort of research that would be custom built for the client. And the jury's still out. I mean, I think this is going to get a lot better, and it's way better than it was 2 years ago, but it's still a little wobbly. So usually what I do is do research that is non-collaborative. The reason we do that, to go back to the toast example, everybody sort of understands what a piece of toast is. Most people have a pretty good idea of how you might go about making a piece of toast. But how many people sitting in the room have a good idea of the strategic decisions made when you're getting serial information from a set of parallel databases within a context in which, there are 58 other tasks the product needs to support? And so to do this, you can get a little bit of the way by having people put up sticky notes in a room. But typically what you got to do is analyze these technical people in depth by interviewing them appropriately and then building a model out of what they say.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, tell us a bit more about that. So you're saying you called it non-collaborative? No, you called it a different name.
Non-collaborative. Really simple. It's qualitative interviewing, right? And
Okay.
Basically it is undertaken. Stakeholders might be with you when you do it, but they're typically watching and not participating. And this could be kind of a tricky skill to learn. And the reason you do it this way is because the researcher is specialized in what to ask and how to follow up on it, because he or she knows that they're going to be building a work model out of it, which is another layer of specialized practice, right? But that's what you do with the insights. Like I say, I mean, everybody gets insights these days. The data is there. Analyzing it and figuring out what to do with it is the real trick, right? And so that's what a trained researcher can help.
Definitely. And we were talking about that also when we covered product analytics software. But try to simplify it for me a bit more. If I don't have a researcher like yourself, and I don't have, I mean, I do appreciate the need for someone like you, but let's say I don't have one, and many product managers out there don't. What is it that you suggest that I would do in regards to this type of interviewing users or clients or whoever it is, and then building such a model?
Well, you can look at Steve Portugal's Interviewing Users, which is probably the definitive book on the subject and is really approachable, from Rosenfeld Media, which is a great source of UX books. No connection, just a shout out. They're fantastic. But so what you want to do is you want to interview people about their process. You want to ask them, okay, well, how would you start? Pinging those databases for their regex returns or whatever it is, right? And then walk through and then follow up on, probe on things that are difficult, things that they don't like, things that they really enjoy, and just sort of get a sense, let them lead the conversation. Now, you're recording all this. You ask them to first, of course. And then when you're done with that, you get the transcript made. And there are two services really that I've heard people using, Rev, and my favorite, which is otter.ai. Either one is great. They are game changers for user research. I used to have to do this by hand back in the day by typing it in, and it's a pain. Mm-hmm. So you get those transcripts, and basically it's a record of what your customers think. And when you have those, you can do all sorts of stuff with that data. Typically, what you might want to do is go through and see where people are talking about a specific job, come up with a name for that job. And the job might be something like ensure that log is returning pings when pinged. All right. And then put the comments that they make underneath that job. So the more people you interview, the more jobs you're going to get. Generally, I recommend about 20, because at 20, you will start to see a new weird pattern emerge, like 80% of the time, that may be the game changer. Fewer than that is probably not so good. A lot of people throw around 6. That's in a very limited context. And you want more if you're trying to make product decisions. Picking those people is also important. You want to talk to people who you think are representative customers of yours. And so sometimes that's a role. A lot of times, something to think about is reaching out to people whose behaviors fit something you're trying to support, or their likely behaviors. So for example, it might not be that you want database administrators. You want database administrators who have started their job within 2 years. Maybe they have more than 2 years of experience, say, but let's say they've been at their new position fewer than 2 years, because they're going to have different attitudes and mindsets about the approach of that job that your product may support. Now, how do you figure this out? Well, because you've been doing customer interviews and you gradually get a better sense, and you and your team can hypothesize. So if you wander into this legacy situation and we think this guy is dealing with this and this, maybe our product could support that. Maybe we should ask him more about the realities of dealing with a legacy situation. Now, your B2B software doesn't know about that until you put it in. So in other words, it may turn out that planting the wheat is a really critical part of this process. And more importantly, that no one else in the startup world is paying attention to it. So when you get in and you find all the wheat spreaders and they're going to look similar, right? You can build up a profile and then contact them. Turns out that's the toehold you get to start broadening your wedge.
Well, that's really fascinating. I'm thinking about, you're having to do a lot of data analysis here. So are those tools that are capturing the transcript of the interviews, are they doing any sort of analytics in terms of identifying those patterns in the data for you?
That's an excellent question. I think there are a lot of promises being made in that area. I'm deeply skeptical of them. I don't think this is beyond the reach of AI. I think your situation may be beyond the reach of AI. In other words, if you're doing this right, you're tailoring it and targeting it. You're trying to find certain things that the AI is only going to have a rough idea of. And if it spits out a general profile, right, something that would apply anytime, that's probably not going to be too helpful. So we see these tools being adopted, various tools, Qualtrics, things like that, typically at large corporations, and they're priced to match. And in my experience, and I'm just, speaking frankly here, it's usually about some middle manager checking a box rather than trying to deliver insight about a product. So like anything else, if you need to scale, you probably want to get Oreos for the break. If you're just a startup, you could probably bake cookies for everybody, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, that does. Good analogy. I like that.
One of the things that you said before about, finding through your different interviews and talking with different users, finding the opportunities really ring the bell for me with the recent book that Teresa Torres released. And again, no affiliation. I'm just a shout out, Continuous Discovery Habits. And she's talking over there about continually having interviews with your users and et cetera. And she has a small template over there for what she calls an interview snapshot. Like it's a one-pager where you put the different information that these people told you, that the users told you. So like a memorable quote, quick facts, insights, and opportunities. And this is where to really distill some of those sentences that you heard, I think like you mentioned, Troy, from these interviews and bring them into then the opportunity tree, which is what the tool she's using to map all of those in one place. So you can actually see all of those opportunities. I think this is a simplified or quite simple tool to use that everyone can pick up probably. Do you have or do you know of tools out there that are more sophisticated than that, or can really help you systemize how you collect the data and those opportunities?
Well, for qualitative research, the first thing is this space is relatively new. Mm-hmm. The need has been around for as long as I've been in the field, for 15 years. And we did it all like with this horrible glued together manual stack, and like uploading videos was a nightmare and editing them was worse, and et cetera, especially on the move with an eye tracker. So a lot of this is mitigated, and not too many people use eye trackers anymore. So that was that problem solved. But anyway, what we're seeing is that only in the past 3 or 4 years have there been products trying to address the pain points of user research. And the biggest ones are going after the biggest pain points, which is recruiting of users.
Yes.
So things like usertesting.com and so forth. Now, again, at scale, these can be extremely helpful. If you are small, if you are a startup, then you've got to use them with caution because, again, going the hand-built route is probably your secret weapon. Don't scale until you have to, I tell startups, because you lose a lot of the good stuff when you do that. So in terms of tools emerging into this space, there's not really a consensus discipline-wide on what tools you need, first of all. And a lot of them tend to be fairly simplistic. Some version of Word, maybe an Excel spreadsheet, glued together. If you're taking video, like for a usability test, which many people do, you can record it edit it in Camtasia. Moray gives you some specialized user research features. These are usually more than what most startups require. Now, if you get a consultant, they might well use it, and it helps them, right, to create videos of usability tests for stakeholders or investors especially. But other than that, a lot of it is still like most business software. It's a bunch of Excel sheets glued together because it works well enough, right? Because the real pain here, it used to be capturing the data, and now we can record and transcribe it well enough, and then it's the analysis, and the analysis gets much faster when you have that text there. But other than that, it depends. Delve, for example, is a product that's coming out to help you do the qualitative coding, which is when you pick out the statements and try to lump them together. And I wouldn't call it a game changer. I think it's a nice product, reasonably priced. It's still a startup, so they're really willing to work with you. And it does save some time, especially if you have to collaborate with other teams. I'm a solo consultant practitioner, so this is usually not as important. Although I'm probably going to end up using Delve more as we go further.
Interesting. Yeah. Cool. No, this is really interesting area. And also interesting to hear your take on the maturity of this and how much this space is growing and maybe the availability for some problems that have not yet been tackled or have not yet been tackled properly and maybe could be tackled by someone out there.
Right. And this is interesting because I think one of the big drawbacks, the reason I still use Google Docs and Excel sheets and so forth, usually the tools are not really the big deal. The big deal is the cognitive architecture. So Teresa Torres, whom I admire a great deal, she's fantastic. Her whole practice is designed to fit into agile production teams because that tends to be what small to medium software companies do, right? And they're in charge of these decisions at that level. Now, the thing is, you lose a lot from that approach. It is what it is. It seems to be taken up by these software companies pretty readily. And she's great, of course. She's fantastic to work with. But you lose some things. You tend to lose a lot of the emotional and really game-changing insight using that sort of feature-driven kind of discovery. The other danger you run into, and again, this is kind of advanced math, but it happens. Doing that continuous discovery and not doing any sort of comprehensive big picture research makes you run the risk of adding features onto your product until suddenly it collapses. And not to talk out of school, but we're seeing this with MailChimp and we're starting to see it with Calendly.
Yeah, these are great points because As product managers, we are trying to learn and become more agile all the time and, fail fast, trying to do different things that will actually put our ideas in front of users and get them validated or not validated. And in the same approach, I believe that this, the continuous discovery is because we don't know everything and because we will never know everything, we kind of bake it into that same agile process while trying to do a big research upfront. To us anyway, or to me anyway, feels like a bit of a waterfall-y thing so I think there is pros and cons for each side, and we need to be mindful about that and see how we can mitigate those risks.
Exactly. And once again, and this is an emerging area, we haven't seen much popular talk about this. It's how well you understand the problem space. And most people think they understand the problem space better than they actually do. I mean, that's pretty universal. But especially when you're dealing with software, especially if that software is supposed to do something novel, it can be really difficult to make assumptions about how people think or what they want or any of that. And you can find out by crashing the car into the wall, but a little steering may keep you from having to crash into a wall in the first place.
Yeah.
So the advantage of the big research, and it's not like some sort of giant waterfall design process or anything like that. It can be ongoing and so forth. You accumulate knowledge, but in a deeper way necessarily than continuous product discovery. You are sort of understanding what people really care about in the space. And the key there is various qualitative and other frameworks you can use, such as jobs to be done and, the ACTA model and whatnot. But what you're trying to do is sort of figure out where the mountains are so you can steer around them. So you can sit down and you can write off an entire class of features, things that make this ping the database faster. Nobody cares. There's no value there. So there, you may have saved your team a year of work right there. So it depends like that. Usually it's not that dramatic, but here's the killer thing. At some point during the process, it will be that dramatic or your researcher is not doing their job right.
I think oftentimes some of the best startups have come from founders that have a problem of their own, and they know the obstacles they have to overcome in order to create the product for people.
That could be an advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah. This is great. I keep going back to the toast conversation, and I'm a big fan of the book Design of Everyday Things and Design Thinking. Yes. I like the big picture things like that because it's so much of our experiences when we experience a product is based on prior experiences. I'm thinking about the toast analogy of, if you asked me to make toast, if I had never experienced someone gathering the wheat, I would never bring that up. But if I grew up on a wheat farm, that would be the first thing I would think of. So I just think so much about the people's experiences and how they bring them into product. So do you see a lot of that when in your research, do people bring up, hey, this last product did this. Why is this not doing this? I expected this. Is that kind of what you're seeing?
This usually happens at least once in an interview. So when I was studying HCI, I mean, there's something in Donald Norman in Design of Everyday Things talks about this, cognitive affordances. So a regular affordance is like a big red button. You want to push it, right? It says push me to you when you look at it. A hammer is designed to fit in your hand and swing in a certain direction. No one ever grabs the hammer by the head. They always grab it by the handle because it looks like that's what you're supposed to do. So in software, this is really difficult because we don't have those cognitive affordances. What we do have is built up over years of experience. Okay, the navigation is usually somewhere near the top, right? And down at the bottom is some stuff that you probably don't need, but if you need it seriously, like contact us if there's a problem, right? So that's kind of my map. And then it goes into much more detail. The problem is there's usually some step missing from an initial design because the designers don't have those cognitive affordances. They don't have time to map them all out. They may not be able to map them all out. And so they do their best job. And I'll give you an example. For the past few days, I have been fighting with my bank, which is a really hidebound, old-fashioned bank, and I've had it. And so I moved my business account to an online bank, which took about 45 seconds and actually made me feel good afterwards. So then at this point, I'm like, all right, we've got to take money out of bank A and put it into snazzy new bank B. I'll just do a bank transfer here with ACH. So I did. I got a warning that said, well, this is going to take 3 days and you have a limit of $1,200 transfer until we decide that, you can handle more. There was far more than $1,200 in the account, I might add, and in an associated account where I'd been a customer with the bank for 20 years. But so there was a warning there, okay, surprise, gotcha. So I had to deal with that. No indication anywhere in the interface that this was the case. And then the transfer didn't show up on my first bank's interface until it had actually gone through. There was no sort of pending notification. Mm-hmm. So when I go out to dinner and, charge $75 on my credit card, it says pending when I look at the list of charges. So this transfer, there wasn't any pending. So it would be very easy for someone to overdraw the account by sending out a transfer, not realizing that a transfer had already been executed, right? Especially if I had a partner who didn't know about any of this and hadn't been in touch with me. So these sorts of things are left out of some very easy cognitive use cases. And then it gets more complex for there. And a lot of times a dev team will be like, well, that's an edge case. The problem is it might be the edge case that blows up the entire product.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's an edge case until you ask a bunch of people and they're like, oh yeah, we all have a similar experience of frustration.
And it may be that fixing that edge case is what your product is really about, the thing that's going to make it a killer app in its space.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. It reminds me of another book, Don't Make Me Think by Stephen Krug, which is a great book for everyone to learn about user experience. And really, it summarizes it in the title. We don't want the user to think too much because otherwise they will just leave the product. We really need to make it simple. Before we wrap up, just I was wondering if you have like a summary. You said your stack is quite lean. It's a very lean stack. And you told us a bit throughout the discussion today about different tools. Can you just summarize for our audience, for your different processes, what type of products you're using?
Absolutely. So again, it's not so much the products, it's how you put them together and what you do with them. Right. So I guess that's the overall summary. So depending on the job, I may use one of several different tools. So most of my qualitative interviewing is done via Zoom. And it was even before the pandemic. The first time I used this, I used WebEx back in 2010 for Tylenol.com, which is jankier than Zoom is, but we made it work, right? You record that, and then you get your transcripts, like I said. If you're doing a usability test, there's usually some sort of recording of that test. Zoom can do that too, right? But typically, you might want to use Moshe or Camtasia because it makes editing the result to put into a stakeholder report much better. Screeners basically are still written by hand, generally, whether you're using a recruiting site or not. So what I like to do is recruit from the client's customer base, because that usually makes them feel more comfortable. If not, we'll do another recruit, which I hate getting into the business of because it's really expensive and I hate it. So I usually outsource it, and that may wreck the client's budget, right? We try to go internal because you can't just use Craigslist or these guerrilla recruiting methods or whatever, because they're terrible. They're going to be worse than doing nothing. So some sort of screener, either user testing or email to people, then a spreadsheet to keep a schedule of when people are supposed to show up for the usability test or their qualitative interview, email reminders. And then at the end, I take those transcripts, which have been auto-provided by Zoom or whatever recording tool I'm using, and either upload them to otter.ai, which will convert the sound files and store the result, or just take the recorded version from Zoom and then go over them, basically in Word or Google Docs, and cut, paste, rearrange, staple, mangle, what have you. And then after that, the final report is usually some combination of PowerPoint slides, finding key findings, maybe with video embedded, and or a paper report. And it will tell people what to do about what we found.
Right. Excellent. And maybe you can share with us those names also. Send it over to us so we can include it with posting of this episode. So everyone
can. My pleasure.
Excellent. It will be easy for everyone to just click on the link and find them. Perfect. We really had enjoyed talking with you, Troy. I think this is amazingly beneficial for every product manager out there. My hope is that every product manager will be able to have someone like you to help with the research, but we know that it's not always feasible. We definitely hope that this is useful learning for everyone. And of course, they can contact you to get your tips and support, and maybe even to hire you. I hope that will be helpful as well.
Fantastic. My Calendly is open, and I love scheduling talks just to bounce ideas with people.
Where can people find you?
I am twinfrey@gmail.com. I tweet at Winfrey, TWINFREY. And as Troy Winfrey, I am found as a user experience strategist on LinkedIn. Don't spend as much time there anymore, but I still get email notifications. So, I'm generally pretty responsive.
Very cool. Yeah, this has been great. I love product, I love data, and I love the human condition. And really, UX research seems to have a little bit of all that. So,
absolutely.
Thanks so much for being here on the show.
It's been my pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Troy.
Thanks to all the listeners, and we'll catch you next time on Product for Product.
This episode of Product for Product was brought to you by The Resurrector, a book by Moshe Mikanovsky, now pre-selling at igg.me/at/the-resurrector until August 23rd, 2021.